few good people left. I'm happy to be here with you today. I come to you just 2 days following Martin Luther King's birthday, or birthday celebration, which took place on Monday the 17th. And we had an annual program at our museum, which we've done now for years, where we actually start at breakfast with a group, and then we march up to the monument in the heat and the cold. And you know, those of us who stood out there trying to get this holiday, you know what I'm saying, frosted and all that. You know, that was just practice for being able to celebrate it. Because now that we have it, we have to continue, I think, to celebrate it, to remind people of Dr. King's great contributions to this country. I've traveled all over the world, and I believe Dr. King might be the most well-known American in the world. There are people who are singing "We Shall Overcome" when the walls came down in Berlin, and they were talking about Martin Luther King and the peace movement here in the United States in languages that we don't even understand. And in South Africa, when they were marching for their freedom over there, they were singing American freedom songs that were patterned after the Civil Rights Movement. And they all know about Martin Luther King, and they've got monuments and museums around the world named for him. And so he may be the most well-known American because he stood up for America's great principles. And of course, we all know that he ended up giving what Abraham Lincoln called his full measure for the cause. I guess I'm somewhat qualified to speak for Martin Luther King Day because I'm old enough now to have known Dr. King, and looking around this room, I'm probably older than anybody else in the house. I grew up in Newnan, Georgia, just south of Atlanta. Went to Morehouse College at the time when Dr. King had come back there to teach a class at Morehouse, and was in the Atlanta Civil Rights Movement. I actually was chairman of that movement for 1 year. And so although people know that I was in Mississippi in the Civil Rights Movement, I actually spent 2 years in Atlanta, picketing and going to jail there, integrating the situation in Atlanta before I went off to Mississippi. And I saw Dr. King the day before he was assassinated in a chance encounter at an airport in Memphis, Tennessee. I, by then, had moved to Washington. I moved here in January of '68, and you all know he was assassinated in April. And let me just say, Dr. King was assassinated. People say that the day when King died, dying is when you lay down at night, say your prayers, get into bed, pull up your covers, and you go to sleep and you wake up in Grover. That's dying. Dr. King was shot by ambush by a coward who had conspired with people to find out where he was, and they found him there, and they shot him. Dr. King was killed. He gave his life in the fight for freedom. He didn't just lay down and die. He wasn't, probably wasn't physically, none of us are ever really ready to go, and I'm sure he wasn't. But he gave his full measure for our freedom here in the United States. So I'm happy to talk to you about Dr. King and about the Civil Rights Movement, of which I was a major part. And let me just tie the two things together. I actually first heard about African-American soldiers in the Civil War when I was in Mississippi in the Civil Rights Movement. I was in a little town called Holly Springs, which is just south of Memphis, Tennessee. Anybody here from Mississippi? It was in Holly Springs, Mississippi, just 30 miles south of, about 60 miles south of Memphis, Tennessee. I had been assigned there by a group called the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC. And you may remember SNCC because it had a president named Stokely Carmichael. And of course, before that, Congressman John Lewis, who's now the congressman from the state of Georgia, were the chairmen of SNCC. I was not the president or the chairman. I was just one of those, what they called field workers, field organizers who went off to Mississippi. I was assigned to this county, Marshall County, Mississippi, because by then I had 3 years of college at Morehouse, and you know what they say about Morehouse men. We thought we were really smart enough to know what we were doing. And we sat down and looked at a map, and we found these counties that had very large black majorities in them, and we went into those counties to organize. Because we knew if we got enough people registered to vote, we could take over that political situation. And so I went into Holly Springs for that purpose, to speak there, to seek at Holly Springs. And I knew before I went over there that this, back during Reconstruction, there had been a black sheriff of Marshall County, that the mayor of that city had been a black person during Reconstruction, during the period from 1860 to 1875, and black people voted. And so when I saw those reports saying black people in 1968 and 70, when they said black people were voting for the first time, that wasn't true. They had voted actually 100 years before that. As a matter of fact, there was a senator named Blanche Bruce, who's buried here in Washington, D.C., who was an elected senator from Mississippi that had two senators from Mississippi during that time. So I knew that before we went over there. And I knew also at that time there weren't any black people registered to vote. So you could imagine what happened when the sheriff first saw me as a young civil rights worker. I was all of about 22 years old. He knew that if I accomplished my purpose, he was going to be out of a job. Because he was arresting anybody who tried to register to vote. He was treating civil rights workers like, and the local people, like dirt. Black people had no rights that he had to respect. And we were sick and tired of that, as Fannie Lou Hamer said. We were sick and tired of that. And we were there to change that. We were able to change that before I left Mississippi. But there I met a man named Henry Reeves, who was a descendant of an African-American Civil War soldier. Henry Reeves had his grandfather's rifle, and he had his uniform. And he told me this story about his granddad who had been a soldier in the Civil War. Now I had told you, I had studied pretty good student at Morehouse, but I'd never heard about this before. I know that there were any black people who put on government uniforms, Douglas said, rifles in their hands, bullets in their pockets, and U.S. on their lapel, fought in the same states where they had been enslaved to defend the flag. And I didn't know that. And he told me, you know, that I was about 22, he was about 60, so y'all know how they like to school young people. He said, sit down right there, so let me show you something. That was very interesting to me, because Mr. Reeves was also the organizer for the NAACP in this county. He had his NAACP card buried in a can in the backyard. But his grandfather's rifle was right over there in the corner, and his uniform.